All right, good afternoon, everyone. As I've shared with the folks who were on the line a second ago, my name is Eva Colin. I work with the Office of Mayor LeVar Stoney and with the Department of Human Services on non-departmental grants is one of the projects that are within my portfolio. So I'll be presenting this workshop today. I do want to share some logistics with you. We have a lot of line and more folks who will probably be dialing in as we proceed. So logistics for today, we're going to try to stay muted. Please enter any questions that you have within the chat box. We've tried to anticipate questions, so I will try to address common questions as we present, but please be sure to add questions to the chat box as we proceed. We'll have a Q&A section at the end when I'll look at those questions to respond, but for the sake of time, it would be really helpful if you just add them in as we go. Some of the staff from the city that are on the line may be able to answer those questions in the chat box as we proceed, bypassing the need for a conversation at the end. But either way, I want to make sure we're answering all your questions. So if we aren't able to get to your question today, we will share a way for you to reach out to us on an ongoing basis. So proceeding from here, this is recorded, so we'll make sure that it's downloadable later. Okay. So we're going to start with the big picture, like what are we here to discuss today? The non-departmental grant program provides one-year funding to eligible nonprofit organizations to address unmet critical needs in the city of Richmond. Public sector and quasi-governmental agencies are also recipients of these funds. Public sector agencies are ones that are not necessarily run by the city, but are public agencies. Things like the Richmond Ambulance Authority is a public sector agency who receives non-departmental funding. The nonprofit category, and I do want to note that the city is unable to make grants to private businesses, so all eligible organizations will have nonprofit status. Eligible for-profit businesses typically partner with the Economic Development Authority if they seek grant funding through city opportunities. For the nonprofits that partner with us, we have three priority funding areas: children, youth, and education, housing, human services and health, and finally, arts and culture. We'll go over what each of those categories means, and hopefully we'll be able to share more about how you may be this opportunity. The timeline, I want to call this out because I think the process can be very long, and it's applying for these funds next week does not mean you're going to get a check in January. I just want to be very clear about that so that we're managing expectations. Big picture, applications will be reviewed in January. Recommendations for grants are due by the end of January to our budget team. Accepted applicants will be included in Mayor Stoney's budget that will be presented to City Council on March 3rd, 2021. City Council will then deliberate on the budget over the course of March and April, and a budget will be finalized by May. What I want to note is that the non-departmental category is considered in the same budget as things like public education and public safety. It's a specific subset of the city's overarching fiscal year 22 budget. So this has made a recommendation to City Council, and City Council considers these grants alongside the other priorities of the city. City Council will then deliberate, like I said, deliberate on the budget. The budget that is passed and finalized in May will go into effect in July. Once that budget is in effect, accepted applicants will then finalize a grant contract with our Human Services Department and the City Attorney's Office over the summer. This grant contract will outline what performance indicators are necessary to meet in order to receive the funds that have been promised. Then Human Services will hold a training workshop for grantees in September. The first invoice is due to the city by October 15th, and the first payment on the grant will follow shortly thereafter, according to contract guidelines. So like I said, this is a fairly protracted process, and I just want to call that out because I don't want there to be any misunderstandings about expediency. We are talking about including the organizations within a very large city budget, and according to that process, people will be paid based on their grant contracts. How do you apply? The completed application or application addenda are due by 4 p.m. on December 18th. This year, if you are a new applicant, that is an organization that has never received funding from the non-departmental budget before, you will complete a full application. If you have received funding from the City of Richmond through the non-departmental grant process in the past, in the last year, then you will complete an addendum to the application, because we still have your application materials on file. We don't need you to do much more than tell us whether or not your programming has meaningfully shifted, particularly in light of COVID, which we do know has affected programming to a significant amount for many organizations. An additional note is that, as some of you may know, last year, we had a proposed budget for this fiscal year that we then basically canceled and reverted to the previous year's fiscal budget. So we proposed a fiscal year 21 budget. When COVID hit and we started to see impacts on our revenue, we reverted to the previous year's budget. As a result, there were a number of organizations that had been approved for funding within the budget who were new, but then did not receive funding because we reverted to the prior year's budget. If you're in that category, you will receive outreach from myself or other members of our team to clarify that you will only need to complete an addendum. It's a little bit complicated. Hopefully this answered some questions, but please understand that we are approachable and willing to answer questions on an ongoing basis. So we may sort out whether you're owing us an application or an addendum at a later date. We might not solve that question this afternoon, but we'll make sure that everybody gets the information they need. We do want to highlight that late submissions will not be accepted. If you do not have those applications in by 4 p.m., we won't be able to consider your application. All applications or application addenda should be emailed to the email address on screen. That's budgetndrequests@richmondgov.com in a single compressed file. All this information is in the materials that are on our website, so you know. And if you're unable to submit electronically, if you're technologically challenged like I can be sometimes, you can absolutely deliver this in hard copy to City Hall. There will be a drop box available on the first floor of City Hall starting December 16th until December 18th from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. each day. When you arrive at City Hall, please approach the security desk on the first floor. We have additional precautions due to COVID, so please approach the security desk and they will direct you to that drop box. I recommend you give yourself a couple days. I would say if I were planning to submit this application, I would try to wrap it up by the 16th to see if I was able to compress a file that was emailable, because like I said, sometimes I'm technologically challenged and I might realize I'm unable to make that compression and then I'd want to drop it off in person. So I just want to name that. Things are a little bit strange this year because of COVID, so we're no longer accepting these applications on the within City Hall and the budget department. So now we're going to dig into what our priority areas are to share a little bit more about what we're looking for in applicants for each of those categories. The first priority area and for Mayor Stoney's non-departmental grants is the children, youth, and education category. To apply for this category, your work must fit within the following range of activities: early childhood education, this includes both childcare and preschool, out of school time activities, whether they be after school or during the summer, in-school support services that address holistic needs of families or support academic goals, and services that provide mentorship, apprenticeships, and or connect secondary students to career and college pathways. Basically, when we talk about this focus area, we're thinking about all the things that public schools don't. So anything that helps children and families thrive in Richmond, but aren't addressed by Richmond Public Schools, that's what falls into this category. And these also reflect major priorities of Mayor Stoney's both first term and upcoming term as well. Moving on to housing, human services, and health. I'm sorry, one second. Oh, well, I'm getting a note that some people are struggling to see the slides, so I'm pausing for a second. I apologize. And yes, I will be sharing the slides later. One second. I apologize, y'all. When I said I was technologically unsavvy, it seems that that's affecting this presentation. I'm going to try to figure out what's going on. It's possible that if you're receiving an error message that says can't display content, that your internet connection might be too slow for this, is one of the FAQs that I'm reviewing. That said, we will be sending this presentation out. But I'm going to try to make sure that this is not a me problem before we proceed to the next slide. Okay, thank you, Demetrius. He Demetrius named in the chat that there may be a difference between how you're viewing the presentation. He's able to see them in a browser, but was unable to see the slides in an app. So if that affects how you're working or how you're viewing this, please jump in. That said, we will be sharing this presentation as a PDF afterwards. We're going to send an email to everybody, so you'll be able to receive it. So we're going to move ahead. If you're not able to see it, you will be able to get this presentation shortly after the presentation concludes. And I do apologize for the technological difficulty. Rachel, I am not certain how to get back. I don't know if anybody on my team can jump into the chat or offer to share. 1 second. Okay. Let me go back. All right, folks, I'm going to continue with the slides. If you are struggling to see them, we will definitely send them out. And I will also try to slow my cadence so to compensate for the fact that some folks are not seeing this on the screen. Sam has shared in the chat one tip, which is you may need to leave the presentation and then re-enter and not select the Open in Teams pop-up option when you're re-entering the meeting. Sam is helping me moderate this chat, so if you are, or this presentation, so if you're coming back in, she'll make sure you have access to the presentation or access to this room. Okay, we're going to jump back in to the priority area of housing, human services, and health. So the second priority area is this one. To apply for this category, your work must fit within the following range of activities. We're looking at homelessness prevention and/or services for the housing insecure, services for seniors and older adults, health services for specifically marginalized populations who require targeted outreach or care, promotion of community health and quality of life, particularly through services targeting low-income residents or communities, and workforce development. Okay. The next priority area and the last of the 3 big priority areas is arts and culture. To apply for this category, your work must fit within the following range of activities to be considered eligible. Providing supports for a vibrant, diverse, and inclusive community that uses visual arts, music, dance, theater, and/or cultural activities to help build One Richmond. Services that expand access to the arts and culture and build cultural equity, and arts programming for neighborhood vitality. As I mentioned before, we also use the non-departmental budget to allocate funds to public sector and quasi-governmental organizations. The City of Richmond regularly makes financial contributions to these partner associations and agencies that provide public goods and services. These organizations this year will use a distinct template to submit funding requests, and that's available in Attachment E of the materials available on the website. The intent there is that these agencies and organizations should provide qualifying information at the same level of detail as city agencies do when they prepare their own budgets. And so this will ensure that the city administration is best able to identify both the goals and needs of its partner agencies. Again, when we're talking about this category, we're talking about things like the Richmond Ambulance Authority or GRTC, not a traditional nonprofit organization. Generally, if you're wondering if you fit into this category, you probably are not in this category. The organizations that align with this category typically know that they are there. When you get into your application, we're going to ask that you submit a project budget proposal as part of your application in order to receive your funds. Your project budget must include descriptions of each of the following: personnel costs, supplies and materials, and overhead costs. One thing that we want to clarify is that non-departmental funds, these funds that we're discussing, legally cannot be used to pay for a full-time employee entirely for salaries and benefits. If a portion of an employee's workload is dedicated to the project that you're funding with a non-departmental grant, it's fine to reflect that, but we cannot be responsible through city dollars for an employee on a staff. This has a lot to do with the fact that we pay based on invoices. We're not providing funding up front, so we're allowing you to invoice us and we're paying you retroactively. And we wouldn't want you to be held up and unable to complete a project because you're depending solely on us to fund your staff. So as a result, we ask that you reflect in your application what percentage of an employee's time would be going toward these purposes. but not with the expectation that city funds would fully stand up employees. This is a common question during the invoicing process, and I want to make sure we're getting in front of it now, because even after applicants are selected, we sometimes receive invoices that reflect that non-departmental funds were to be paying for an employee's salary. So we just need to be very clear, because the city attorney is pretty firm in their analysis of this, and we're not able to do this. We are, of course, able to pay for supplies and materials and overhead costs, the costs associated with running an organization or a project. This is a sample project budget. This would not be an exhaustive project budget, but it's just how I'm putting my development hat on. I used to do fundraising, how if I were applying for this grant opportunity, how I might prepare this budget. I would list out a category purpose, the total cost for this cost purpose for my organization. Then I would name my request as well as other sources of funding that I'm receiving for this cost area, and then a description. So this supposes that I'm running an organization that's doing tutoring after school. Clearly, I have to hire tutors. So I've named the category as personnel. The cost purpose is 15 tutors, 2 hours a day for 100 days. I'm assuming that I'm paying them each $15 an hour. They're part-time. They're working a couple hours a day, 5 days a week for a significant part of the school year, not the whole school year, but a significant part of the school year. So the total cost of my organization is going to be $45,000. So my total request to the city, though, is $5,000, because I've already received commitments from other philanthropic foundations, and I've named that there, who the sources are. And then I provide the description. Non-departmental funds will support active tutoring by 15 tutors over 100 school days at an average of 2 hours per day. Their time will be dedicated to this project. These tutors will be available at no cost to students. You may also, when you say other sources of funding, it might be foundation grants. It might be fees for service. You may be charging, like for instance, in this example, the tutors are available at no cost, but maybe your organization charges a small fee. And so that would subsidize the cost to the city. But as you get lower and you see down, you go a couple rows down, supplies and materials, office supplies, the total cost of the organization is $6,000. I'm asking for $6,000 from the city of Richmond, because the city is able to fully cover that cost, not able to fully cover salaries, but can fully cover the cost of office supplies for the tutors to use with their students. This does not need to be exhaustive in detail. You don't need to list out how many staples you're using, but we do ask for some level of detail to be able to make a decision about the cost effectiveness of your budget proposal. When we look at overhead, rent and utilities, the total cost of the organization for a year is $36,000. I'm asking for half of that, and the other half has been committed by a foundation. And this is to cover monthly rent. But yes, I think I will ask LaSharn if you are available. I think I can unmute you, LaSharn, if you can share, or you can unmute yourself, LaSharn, if you don't mind sharing any additional details about that personnel detail, about how we cannot cover the full cost of an employee. Oh, I think you're muted. Can you unmute? No? Oh. It's not letting me unmute you. So she doesn't have to, she's lucky LaSharn doesn't have to speak. Okay, I will come back and see if we can have LaSharn share in the Q&A. But LaSharn is going to be your best friend if you're a non-departmental grantee. She works with all of our grantees very closely to make sure that they're able to receive the funds that they've been promised. But this is one thing that she ends up supporting a lot of organizations on, is on personnel expenses. So and this slide is a little daunting. It will, like I said, it will come in your inboxes. So you don't have to write everything down right now. When you're proposing your project and your description of impact, we want you to consider these questions. You don't need to provide an answer to each of them, but we do need you to be able to consider them. So as you're telling the story of your organization, it would be great if you can consider them. I'm looking in the chat. Allison, unfortunately, it's not Zoom, so it's not as easy as making her a co-host. She is a presenter, but we might have a technological difficulty on her side in her ability to turn off or mute. But as we're completing this portion of the application, we want you to think through this stuff, and we need to know a lot of it. But what are your goals? What community need does your program meet? How does your program align with the city's goals and expectations? This is all in the application materials. We lay this out. Oh, LaSharn can unmute. I'm going to pause and go back to the project budget and see if LaSharn can. There we go. LaSharn, if you want to share.
Hopefully everyone can hear me.
Yep.
I think the way you explained it, I don't have anything more to add. I'm hearing an echo. I'm hearing a bad echo. Let me see. One thing that we want to prevent, and what we're seeing on the invoice and reports, is that it's supporting an entire position. And what we want to, as you mentioned, Eva, we understand you're implementing a program and you need someone to run the program, but we don't want, if you use $60,000 is covering the salary of a director. So we have to really want to, identify the program. We understand a portion of that salary might be for that individual, but we will really redo the report or the invoice so that we stray away from supporting a position, if that makes sense.
And I also think an important note here is the other reason why we look for other sources of funding is because the city does face challenges when we make projections about our budget, and sometimes the projections in reality don't match up. A very good example of that was this year. We did not anticipate a pandemic when we were drafting our fiscal year's budget, so we had to quickly pivot and change how we were planning on spending money this year. So we want to make sure that your programs and projects are not fully dependent on the city's revenue to be able to accomplish their goals. We absolutely want to be a part in helping you achieve your goals. If you've been selected as a partner, it's because we believe you're doing work that absolutely aligns with us, and not only aligns with us, but helps us achieve our goals for our residents in Richmond. But we want to be sure that those residents get those services and that they're not fully dependent on city funds, that there are other revenue streams that together are braided in order to serve our communities. Okay, I'm going to go back to this description of impact slide. So big picture, we want you to consider what your goals are. We want to make sure you're aligning those goals to the City of Richmond's goals that are outlined in the application materials. We also want to make sure that your program keeps front of mind equity issues, racial equity in particular. The city is in the middle of grappling with, our very complicated past, and we're trying to pave a path forward that puts equity at the forefront. So it's vital to us that all organizations that partner with the city share that goal. The city's undergoing a lot of work to make sure we are operating with equity in mind at every corner of the city agencies. So we want to make sure our partners do as well. It's important that you're able to track your effectiveness. Bluntly, these are tax dollars. We need to make sure we are accountable for the dollars that our community members have invested in us and then in you to be able to deliver these services for Richmond. So it's important that you track. It doesn't have to be numbers. It doesn't have to be quantitative. It can be qualitative or anecdotal. You can tell us stories about the effectiveness of your program, but we will be asking for performance measures, and we'd love participant feedback as well. So, it's fine to be creative in how you determine your effectiveness, but we're going to need to be able to work with you to measure your effectiveness and ensure that we see a return on our investment into your organization. We also want to be sure that your organization is engaging diverse stakeholders and proactively engaging community members, both in terms of planning for services and on an ongoing basis. We also want to know, how does your organization collaborate both with us and other partners to advance programmatic goals? We ask for evidence of, memoranda of understanding with other agencies. If you apply for the Children, Youth, and Education category on an application, it'll ask if you have an explicit partnership with Richmond Public Schools to achieve your goals. It's important to us that we're not working in a vacuum. And so we look for the same from our partners through the non-departmental process as well. We're also looking for, some of the quantitative stuff. How many people do you plan? And how can Richmonders participate in your program? If people want to get involved, how can we help direct people to your organization? How do you market it? How do people learn about it? If you are that organization that's offering tutoring programs after school, how do children at that school or families at that school find out about your program? And then finally, how has your program demonstrated success in the past? What data can you share? What stories can you tell? How many people have you helped or supported? What results have you seen? In other words, how is your program going to benefit Richmond? Now, if your organization or your project is new, it's something you're just getting off the ground, we benefit from learning about how your organization might have worked in other cities that are similar to Richmond. Unfortunately, we're not really at a point where we can fund true startups, things that are brand new ideas. This is not an innovation grant, but we are able to invest in good ideas, ones that have a track record of success in communities like ours. So we are absolutely willing to, like I said, consider new ideas. It's just we want to have a sense of how they will be successful and what we can predict. There's also a checklist with the application, and I call this out because this isn't optional. We provide this for you so that you can check off. There's a lot of material that we need. The reason why we need this information is in order for us to ensure that we are legally able to contract with your organization as a grantee. Part of the review process includes a city attorney review. So we need to know things like, do you have site control? Like if you are offering tutoring programs at your place of business or your organization's property, do you have permission to do that? That matters. We want to make sure we're not, we're all on the same page and we're all above board. We want to see what your bylaws are, your operating budget. And I do want to call out that we asked to see your operating budget, and that is actually different than the project budget we're seeking to fund. The operating budget is the whole budget for the whole year. The project budget is what you're asking us to contribute to for a specific project, assuming that your organization does more than just that one thing that we're funding through. And then we're also looking for some of that, the paperwork, like the federal tax exemption, just to prove that you're a nonprofit, you have nonprofit status and things like that. Finally, your proposal will be evaluated by city staff. Like I said, it's going to be people from a variety of different agencies, both the mayor's office and human services, budget gets involved, legal gets involved, and we're looking to make sure that your organization is compatible with the identified priority areas for which you applied. But just so you know, the evaluation sheets that we use when we sit around the room and read through our giant stack of applications, we fill out these sheets that are actually in your application guideline document. So you will be able to see exactly what we use to score applications in there. And I would encourage you to use those to help you fill your application out. All applicants for the general fund, CGF, you'll see that acronym throughout the application. CGF means City General Fund. The non-departmental budget category is a category within the City General Fund. And you must have the following criteria in place. You must have appropriate nonprofit certification. You must be in compliance with all regulations at all levels. We need to make sure you have a well-developed organizational structure, and if you're a nonprofit, you must have an active board of directors with fiduciary responsibility. The applicant agrees to coordinate their projects with the appropriate partnerships, civic groups, neighborhood and bloom partnerships, civic groups, business organizations, city departments. And the applicant must disclose any lawsuits to which it's been a party in the past 3 years. So this is just a screenshot out of the organizational threshold criteria. And then you'll see all of this in there, but this is just an example of what you'll see in the application. Finally, we've got a couple of helpful links. I will make sure that those are also in the email that I send to all attendees. I'll include those in there, both the budget webpage, as well as the forms and links and the notice of funding availability and all application materials. So I'm going to pause there. I'm going to take a look at the chat and see what questions have popped up, but I'm also going to try to answer questions that are common. So we have a few questions that have come up over the years that we want to make sure we're covering. One question that we often get is, can you fill out for multiple categories? Organizations align with one category. If you have different projects under one organization, you absolutely can apply for 2 categories. So if your organization runs a tutoring program and also does a needle exchange, you could apply for both children, youth, and education, and also the the human services and health and housing category. So but those would be 2 different projects. We would not expect to see the same project in multiple categories. Please pick a category, so we only review that one project once. Okay, let me look at the chat. Is there a page limit? I'm just going to start at the most recent and scroll back. No, there's no page limit, but I do want to name that you will have to be able to send a compressed file. So I would encourage you to figure out how to probably compress a document maybe into a PDF that might make it small enough, or you can deliver it in person. Winnie, can you apply for 2 separate projects within one field? Yes, you can. You know, I think we've seen in the past organizations who are running after school programs might also run a summer camp. And those are both in the children, youth, and education category, but they're 2 distinct programs. And yes, if you're submitting in 2 categories, you can submit 2 separate applications, but you can also just make a note for all of the supplementary material. We don't need to receive 2 copies of your 990. We don't need to receive 2 copies of your organizational budget. I would encourage you, if you are going to apply for 2, if you're going to apply twice within 1 category, please contact me and then I can walk you through this. We'll get on the phone and talk through like what we actually need you to turn in versus not. That this might be a one-to-one conversation rather than a full presentation conversation. Let me see what else we've got. So Rachel, the addendum asks for a copy of the FY21 application. Does this include all of the attachments that were submitted for FY21 or just the main application itself? LaSharn, do you mind answering that question?
I don't mind. So that has been a question that's come up several times. If you are currently receiving funding for fiscal year 21 and none of the information has changed, we have your attachments on file. So just do your addendum, still attach the application, and the attachments that you attached last year, we still have. So you do not need to resend that if nothing has changed.
Thank you, LaSharn. Christine asks, what do you recommend we do if you'd like to reflect on how our project contributes to racial equity given the events of 2020 if we're only completing an addendum? I'd encourage you to include, you know, a reflection to that extent. Part of the addendum, I'm blanking on the specific language in the addendum, but there is language around, you know, how has anything shifted in 2020? And if your organization has, you know, been working to reconcile its historical structure with the events of 2020, and you have had a reckoning around racial equity, absolutely reflect on that. It's important for us to see that. It's important for us to know. One thing that I also want to share is that even though we are not able to fund every good project that we see, and I do want to name that, we get a lot of great applications and we just can't fund everything. By applying to this process, you're able to basically invite the mayor's office in and the human services department into the work that your organization is doing. And it allows us to identify potential partners on future projects. In the past, we've had applicants who might not have been able to win non-departmental funding for whatever reason. It might have been a lack of funds available. It might have been the project area was slightly lower priority than other more urgent priorities that year. But those partners have actually been invited to do other projects with the city or have been put forward by Mayor Stoney to philanthropists for other funding opportunities. So I invite you to apply, and I promise you that even if you might not win funding, might be small solace because it's always best to win the money. But if you don't win the funding, we often do find other ways to champion organizations, particularly those that are doing important work that aligns with the efforts of the city. Can I look back? A little bit more. Wow, guys, I'm sorry. There were a lot of questions about being able to see the presentation, and I missed all of that because I was so focused on presenting. I apologize for that. Okay, I'm gonna scroll down. Oh, yes, technical question. Part of the application is fill in the blank, but is a PDF. Do you have an editable copy available? Yes. We've run into this problem a couple times. I think what we are going to do is put the Word document onto the website so that we have an editable copy. LaSharn, I think we'll work with budget to make sure that the Word document or a fillable PDF is on the website, something that is easier to use than what we might have already put up there. Okay. LaSharn, April asked the question, it's a good question. For question 8 on page 7, is this just to see what an organization has done in the current year or simply a table form of goals for the next year? You're muted.
I know. I was trying to go back up to the question because I don't have the application in front of me to look at that. What I'm looking at the question on page 8. Is this just to see what organization has done in the current year and simply a table form? Yes. So she asked, Is this just to see what the organization has done in the current year? That's correct. And simply a table form of goals for the next year. Yes. So we want to see what you've done in the past and what you are going to do in the future. So we'll get like a full picture. So yes, we don't need details. Right.
Those will inform the performance measures that go into the final contract.
Right. That is correct. So when they're doing their application, like you said, we will take that information to do performance measures and scope of service. So I always tell people, make sure everything is measurable, because that's what we'll use when we do the contract.
What is the range of funding available? Is there a limit? It's a very good question. And I giggle because I'm watching LaSharn's reaction to this as well. The bottom line is, right now, we basically are in the middle of determining the whole city budget. And so the budget team is going to determine what of our total city budget is available for non-departmentals based on the priority areas of the city. So we ask that you include a realistic presentation of what your budget needs are. If we can't fund the whole project, we will. I think there's a question in there that says, you know, how will partial funding affect your ability to complete this project? And so we ask that question because in some cases, yes, we can fully fund a project, but in other cases, or fully fund a proposal, not a project. We are not the sole funders for projects. But we ask that because we need to be able to have some flexibility, because bluntly right now, I cannot tell you, and it's because we don't know what the funding availability is for the whole non-departmental category. So we will consider all of this together. There is no, I wouldn't say there's like a limit to applying. There's a wide range in grants based on what people have requested or needed, and based on how they are determined to be a need that is a priority of the city. But that's a conversation I'm happy to have with you on a one-off basis. I know that was not a very helpful response. Megan, are you able to change some of the project proposal for the upcoming year if we are currently funded? Yes. So the addendum is designed to allow you to share with us how you may be changing your programming in the coming year. It's designed to streamline the application process so that existing grantees who've already experienced a fair amount of scrutiny from the city don't have to go through the entire outlay, but instead just get to the crux of what their funding proposal is for the next fiscal year. So you absolutely can change some of your proposal if you've already been funded, if you're looking for funding into the next year.
And Eva, just to add, some of the questions I've received is, just to piggyback on what you said, a lot of our current grantees, because of COVID, are now going virtual. So we do understand that, and they can curtail, you know, their addendum to make those changes. So I've received a lot of questions about, you know, last year applied for, you know, this way of doing things, now it's virtual. So they are allowed to just explain the same project, same program, but now we're doing things virtually. Just please make sure all of that information is included in the addendum.
And Kelly, I see your question about the range of funding, and I think my short answer is yes. You know, some organizations are funded at 5,000, some organizations are funded at 50,000 or above. It really is dependent on the work that your organization is doing, whether or not other folks are participating in the same work. Kelly, I encourage you just to shoot me an email and we can hop on the phone and talk through the specifics of your first time application. And hopefully I could be helpful there. I don't know how much I can share right now that will be general enough to help everyone or specific enough to help you. So why don't we chat afterwards? Rachel, can you further clarify about updating info from the FY21 application for the addendum? If legal information, org chart, et cetera, has not changed, but staff members or maybe board members have changed or changed positions, do you want info that has changed to be submitted? That's a really good question. I think honestly, when we were pulling this together, we assumed that things would stay static. I would encourage, and I'll put this into the email as well, that anything that has changed, please reflect. You can add that as a page to your application or to the addendum, as it may be. But yes, if things have shifted, we want to know. We want to make sure we've got our contact information correct. We want to make sure we have the org structure correct. Anything that's changed, if you're an existing grantee, please reflect in your addendum. And Robert, I see what you're saying about the fillable PDF. That is good to know. So LaSharn, I think we're going to need to get a document on the website because it looks
right.
like
And
it's hard to see.
That will be done. I just been emailing budget office. They will put a fillable and or Word document on the website. So we will definitely take care of that.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing this with us. For full transparency, we try to make this better every year. And sometimes as we try to make it better, we do things like come up with a brilliant idea of using a fillable PDF, only to learn, as Robert shares with us right now, that it's actually not as helpful as we thought it might have been. So thank you for your grace and your patience with us as we work through this. Let me see. Any other questions? Oh, Dr. Goldchamp, I see your hand raised. Sorry, I was looking in the chat box. Unfortunately, we have limited the ability of participants to speak. So if you have a question, you can share it in the chat box. If you have a question that needs to be shared verbally, feel free to email me and we can hop on the phone and we can go there from there. Good question, Christine. What is appropriate documentation of site control? A good example of site control is if you are leasing the property that you are using for your facility, you'd be able to show that you have the legal rights to the building that you're in. If you are operating programming there and you're using it under a lease, being able to show that your landlord is up to speed with how you're using your programs. This kind of looks different for each organization. I mean, of course, if your organization owns your property, you can state that and print out, you could send us a screenshot of the assessor's link to that or show your deed. LaShawn, I don't know if you have other examples of how people have shown site control in the past, but those are a few of the ways that I've seen it done. Yeah,
I have nothing more to add. I haven't seen any, so.
Yeah. I do want to encourage you all to reach out to us if we're unable, the next slide is the phone number to call if you have additional questions. So between the email, if you pre-registered, you received an email from me in your inbox with the link for this presentation. Feel free to email me directly. You can call the phone number that's on your screen. That's 804-646-3096, 804-646-3096. And we will make sure that we get back to you. We understand that the application process is pretty clunky. It's intensive. It doesn't look like foundations applications because our municipal government. We have to have different things than a traditional philanthropic foundation may need from applicants. So we appreciate the time that you put into applying, and we want to make sure we can be as helpful as possible through that process. Any other questions? As a reminder, please enter your questions into the chat if you have questions. Otherwise, you can follow up with an email to me or a call to 804-646-3096. And I'm going to pause for one more beat to make sure that there's no last minute questions. But otherwise, thank you for your time today. Lois, good question. When will the fillable document be available? I think we're going to try to get that up by noon on Monday. I think we're going to try to do it today, but I want to make sure that we have until noon on Monday to get that up there. If that makes sense. Okay, great. Oh, April's got one more question. In regards to out of school time, it looks like there's a priority for elementary and middle school. Is that just for school-based? With out of school time, we're willing to consider all the way up. The reason why it looks like there is a priority for elementary and middle school is because the mayor had set forth as a priority universalizing access to elementary and middle schools across the city, given that our high schoolers split their time often between career exploration, part-time jobs, and other things. We wanted to make sure we were able to saturate the elementary and middle school landscape first. It's not just for school-based. We want to be able to see that anybody can access your program. So being able to show accessibility will be important. The reason why we've historically focused on school-based or in proximity to schools is because so often too many of our kids can't access programming because they lack a car or a parent who has a car. But if you can show that your program is equitably accessible, we will absolutely consider funding it. Does not have to be based at a school. Okay. Anyone else from Team City of Richmond have anything to share, whether it be Sita or Sam, anybody else? The final question in terms of church and school are in one but separate on legal paperwork. Why don't we communicate over email? I think, or over a call. I probably will need to get a little bit more information to make sure that I'm giving you the right answer, Ms. Bias. Okay. All right, everyone. Yep, Sam's closing us out. Thank you for joining us, everybody. We're going to make sure that this recording is available for download. I will follow up with an email with the PDF of this presentation, as well as the links that I shared. Please don't be a stranger. Thank you for all that you do for our city, and thank you for your patience with my technological challenges throughout this presentation. I really do appreciate all of you, and if I don't have a chance to connect with you before the holidays, happy holidays.